Good morning, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome, everyone, to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. This is the second session of this weekend, and we have Shri Babaji Bob Kindler from Hawaii, and he will be continuing his lecture today on Swami Vivekananda's vision of Chatushtya Yoga, the four great yogas, and his vision of new religion for this new age. Viewers, whatever questions you have, you should leave it in the question and day box. And at the very end, last 10-15 minutes, Babaji will answer them. So with this very brief opening remarks, I request Sri Babaji to start today's session. And again, thank you, Babaji, for coming on our session. And we are very honored, very grateful to have you here. Please start your session.
Thank you for being such a gracious host, Nitin. Very privileged and feel very gratified to be here. I'd like to start with a Sanskrit chant, as is usual in the tradition. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akandarupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. As you heard from our wonderful moderator at Advaita Academy, we welcome you here to the Hawaiian Islands, where SRV has its ashram called Badranath, which you are visiting right now via this modern mechanism and this fine webinar facility that we have. And as you just heard, we'll be continuing on with this discourse on the four yogas. Those are the universally accepted yogas. You hear many of different kinds of yogas, and if you remember, if you were with our class yesterday, I showed you a universal ocean of waves of yogas, more than you could shake a stick at, as the expression says here. An overwhelming amount of yogas, many of them very powerful and effective to the task of gaining enlightenment, which we should say over and over again is the true meaning and goal of yoga. And when we speak about Sri Ramakrishna in this particular time, we look at his beloved devotee, Swami Vivekananda, and in that way are fortunate enough to have him have graced this planet in both Eastern and Western spheres and brought to us the Vedanta in the West, in America, in Europe. Some of my students here, we often marvel at that fact that we have been graced with such a great soul in this day and time when spirituality has gone missing. Even according to the tradition, the four ages of Satya, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali Yuga, the Kali Yuga being evidently where we are right now, loses about a third to a quarter of its spirituality as it advances through the cosmic cycle of a Mahayuga, or 4 yugas. So those are teachings in the tradition of Vedanta and Hinduism, which then puts us in mind of the predicament that we are in here in the Kali Yuga. And particularly, I would say, as I was mentioning yesterday, the Western people who have not been so fortunate as to be able to receive the depths and profundity of Indian Dharma. And with all its many darshanas, darshana is a beautiful Sanskrit word that just means a path to clear seeing. And I was mentioning that when we were looking at the 4 yogas yesterday, that to clarify our sight, or to make thine eyes single, as Jesus said in his time, we can avail ourselves of Jnana Yoga, or this, what Swami Vivekananda called this very swift but difficult path to enlightenment. Whereas other paths may take a little longer and go along without the need for so much intellectual speculation and contemplation. Jnana Yoga goes straight to the point, or cuts right at the throat, as we used to say. That's Mother's wisdom sword that will cut off the unripe ego of ignorance, and therefore keep us on track with our spiritual path when we are living in an age such as this. The downsides of which I don't have to repeat here, so many of them are suffering them, and many others are trying to forbear them, and others are trying to transcend them. But there are a few special rare souls like Swami Vivekananda who showed us a life of supreme balance, how to live in a state of sthiti pragnasya, as Krishna, the other topic and subject of our talk today, exemplified and spoke about in the Bhagavad-Gita, sthiti being steady, unwavering, and pragnasya being wisdom, pragya. So to be steady in that wisdom that keeps you aware of the presence of the divine, even in a world and an age such as this, amongst people who are benighted in many ways as to the original truth and knowledge of spirituality. And as Vivekananda himself remarked, who are under the pale of irreligion right now. And he wanted to bring back religion. Basically, his definition of irreligion was a lot of mystery mongering and superstition that had come to the fore. Taking the wrong things literally, and then when you hear the right things, the proper things, not taking them literally enough. So that falls into the hands of the adept, sincere, qualified aspirant to carve out a path for him or herself. And therefore we need that triple gem, Guru, Dharma, and Sangha. Guru is an adept spiritual teacher, and the Sangha is, of course, a family of like-minded souls. And Dharma are those teachings that Sangha and Guru talk about. We mentioned that yesterday in terms of Atma Vichara, how to question properly when you're there in the company, or they call holy company, or sadhu satsanga. Lord Vashishta called it in Yoga Vashishta, that great scripture. So how to form adept questions. So I hope people are right now taking notes, so that anything that I say, which is all going to be in keeping with the Dharma and its attainment, and possibly its lack, because it's a very positive thing to look at the negative side of things, as the father of yoga has told us. Negative teachings bring a lot of truth to the fore and get rid of the covering power and the distorting power of Maya, and bring about the revelatory power of Maya. So Maya, this, as Vivekananda called it, name, form, time, space, and karma, or causality, cause and effect, those 5 things, that was how he defined Maya. When other people were calling it simply an illusion. but he actually called it a statement of fact. And that's why I chanted to open up this class, Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha. That is how the world, time, space, living beings, that's all Brahman you're looking at. Somehow the veiling power and the distorting power has turned it into Maya in front of your eyes. And so yesterday's class, I mentioned how we must see things as they are for aspiring yogis and yoginis. So that would mean not just a scientific look through the objects at particles to see that everything's empty, but then not coming up with the right conclusion or the right definition of the word emptiness. Means empty of the power to fulfill you and empty of substance. So there is an essence, though, behind this apparent substance. And all the great souls will tell you that, even those who don't necessarily support the idea of there being the existence of God. There are Indian darshanas and, of course, Buddhism and Zen and other teachings that have sprouted out of India in this long efflux of time that don't necessarily want to mention names and forms in terms of that absolute reality. In Vedanta and yoga, in Tantra, in Samkhya, and Buddhism and so forth, Jainism, you have this very close relationship with God, with form and beyond form both. So you're holding a double ideal there. Sri Ramakrishna said, it's difficult to hold two ideals, but it can be done. It's sort of like a man reaching out to pick a rose off a bush, but coming back with the rose, but also a thorn in his hand. So it's rather painful is what he meant, to try and hold two ideals. But for the spiritual aspirant that wants truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, as the expression goes in the courtrooms, they want the highest truth, and they're going to have to live up to that ideal and raise themselves up to the standard and not compromise it. It may be that you'll have to compromise with the world of name and form, but you're not supposed to compromise with the truth at all. So you hold that sacrosanct in the background. And the four yogas help you to do that, as we looked at them yesterday. There's a chart that I composed there that I hope all of you saw. Anyone new today or joining in, you can look back on that on the recording. But the four yogas chart was a division into these four great universal pathways that each had bullet points of their own as to how to follow that path. And as I was saying yesterday, to make it a hands-on affair, you have to participate in your own spiritual awakening. It's not just going to happen. And in fact, if you listen to the greater teachers, they'll say that you must be a lamp unto yourself. And in the case of Swami Vivekananda, he said, you need a guru, no doubt. Everyone needs a guru in this world. But the guru can't give you enlightenment. The guru just removes obstacles from the path so you yourself can take that great pearl of great price, as it's called in Christianity, and possess it yourself and reach the highest goal of human existence in this very lifetime. While the getting is good. That's one good thing that can be said about an age of darkness, like the Kali Yuga, is that the light is more pronounced in an age like that. And therefore, most beings with any higher intelligence should be able to make their way to the goal, or at least to the penultimate goal. I'd say salvation is a goal, and love of God can net it for you. That's the Bhakti Yoga path. But the path of liberation in India has some higher qualification attached to it. And there'll have to be some refinement, as we were talking about this morning in our own satsang here in SRV Loka, about the need for using these dharmic tools to awaken ourselves to the truth, and having a spiritual path and a sadhana and practice that's ongoing. So that's what I mean about participating in a spiritual path. You can't just sort of let it lie fallow. There are many songs in India that talk about the ground of my mind has been lying fallow for so long, and I haven't gotten out there and fertilized and planted seeds, so I'm not getting any great harvest in my life. So in that case, it's going to take some, in this world at least, and in this condition we're in, some strong self-effort on the part of aspirants to reach that supreme goal, to even approach it, I think. So again, the 4 yogas, we've been seeing how they all help us. And I want to show you, to start out then, with this usual preamble of mine. And I'd like to repeat again that my style of classes is geared more towards hands-on sadhana, so that you're not just hearing a talk, but you're actually taking in dharmic teachings that you can apply in your life after the fact, and then keep up the practice every day. I counsel dozens and dozens of people as to how to turn their life into a divine life via spiritual practice. And it's, I can tell you, not necessarily a popular life, a popular thing that you have to work hard because you're working hard enough in the world just to make your way. But if you do have a deep desire, it's called mumukshutvam in our tradition, a deep desire to be free, to gain moksha or mukti, then it's going to fall upon your shoulders to keep up a spiritual life. It's sort of like Sri Ramakrishna said, that people enjoying a marriage processional going by. So they're all standing there enjoying elephants and clowns and colors and carriages all going by. One man is standing there with him, but he's got a big burden over his shoulders. He's carrying a big weight. And so what Sri Ramakrishna means like that is that some people have to carry on the burden of husband, wife, children, money, making a living, managing land, and all the things of the world while they watch this wedding processional of God realization go by, if you will. So that's the Dharmic householder who has a great weight on their shoulder because they have to hold these 2 ideals. One, knowledge of the fact that Brahman is in everything and exists everywhere. It is existence. And number 2, that you have to, in this world, in this body at least, keep up a daily practice in order that that salient fact remains clear on your mind, that you can keep thine eye single. Keep the Jnana Chakshu open. That's how Krishna described the third eye, the Jnana Chakshu. Talked to Arjuna in the Gita about that. So my style of classes then is to emphasize that, to encourage people to practice, not just to listen, but to take what they hear and roll it over in their minds in contemplation. Now, that is not meditation. When you get into meditation, it's a higher limb of yoga, and it's going to lead you beyond knowledge. But in the meantime, if your mind is hampered by ignorance, or hampered by suffering, or hampered by unclarity, then as Sri Krishna says in the Gita, Nahi Ganena Sudrisham Pavitram Iha Vidyate, that knowledge is the supreme purifier in that case, and it'll get rid of ignorance better than anything. So you entertain that, what you hear in your mind, and that's called manana, or sometimes it's called yukti, to analyze what you hear. And I must say here that you should probably analyze it not from the standpoint of argumentation. That's called tarkika buddhi, the intellect that's always arguing about what it hears. But different than arguing is analyzing with an open mind and open heart, and with a mutual contact with your preceptor. Sahana vavatu, sahana bhanaktu, sahaviryam karavavahai. You know the ancient Vedic peace chant. So it's all about those 2 beings getting along, the guru and the shishya, and hopefully the sangha too. And if there's if there's content in that process, then everyone grows. But if there's argumentative intellect going on, then why have you come to the teacher in the first place? You can go and fend for yourself out in the world. An authentic teacher is one who can clarify everything for you and should be able to do that in a matter of months or years, depending on how deeply engrossed people are in their own problem of avidya, as Patanjali calls it. So if we can open the ways to our inherent knowledge, is a good way of putting it. What we're saying here is that all knowledge lies within you, or Christ put it, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So if you can access that, then of course, then the mind, as one questioner asked yesterday, the mind can become its own guru, is how Sri Ramakrishna put it. Until then, you must go to a teacher, Vivekananda says, or else you won't be able to make any spiritual progress. And they asked him why, and he said, because you can only get spirituality from another soul. You cannot get it from books and temples. So he made a very stark pronouncement about seeking spirituality externally only. So this is why I'm saying, take these teachings in as precious truths of the Dharma, roll them over and over in your mind and realize them and be free. As Shankara puts it, Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayam San Sammatram Anandaganam Vibhavayam Samahita San Bahir Antaram Va Kalam Nayetaha Sati Karma Bande. Burn those karmas, you see. How do you do it? By taking what's external all around you and merging it to what's internal inside of you. Then render the two into one state. Then meditate upon that state. Then pass your time contentedly and be free. So this great sannyasin Shankara, whose picture showed up here, image at the beginning of the class under the Advaita Academy emblem, has given us very direct ways in a rather recent time, because 700 AD was when he lived, and that's rather recent in Indian history. He gives us these wonderful teachings, take the external and internal and make them one individual state, because that's what they are. And by dividing them into two, you're confusing yourself. And then into three, and then into four, and then into many. So that oneness that Shankara is known for gets lost to humanity, as Krishna says, over the long efflux of time. And people fall into an age of darkness. So this is all why we want to emphasize a hands-on spiritual practice. And yesterday we looked into the 4 yogas, as I was saying, and then the universal ocean of waves of universal, of consciousness, and in terms of the names of yoga. Today, to start us off, because we looked so deeply into Swami Vivekananda's 4 yogas and how they, according to him, are the new religion of this age. Jnanam, wisdom; Bhakti, devotion; Raja, or Dhyanam, or Buddhi. You can call that the yoga of meditation, or 8-limbed yoga; and karma, the yoga of action. Because meditation and knowledge is so close together, you have many names for that. So those 4 yogas he's calling the new religion of this age. He wanted to bring them forth. Is it a new idea? My point here is that Sri Krishna was talking about it in the Gita in a very ancient age, and calling it Chaturdashi Yoga. So let's look at a chart on what Sri Krishna said about it, since yesterday we looked at the 4 yogas chart under Vivekananda's auspice. So here, as you see this beautiful chart, and the image of a painter here on the Big Island, who's a friend of mine, who actually passed away recent years. He passed away sitting up in yogic, in cross-legged position. They found him. He had left the body. And he had these beautiful visionary pieces of work that he said I should use for my work. So here I've placed it behind here. And since today's theme or sub-theme might be the wings of a bird, how a bird flies, the image fits very well with that. We're going to look then at the 2 wings of the bird. Yesterday were Bhakti and Jnana. And we also looked at action and inaction. called Karma and Raja, or Jnana Yoga. So here, all four of those are listed, but as I said earlier, you find that Sri Krishna was using terms like Buddhi Yoga, and so that has to be aligned with Jnana Yoga as the yoga of meditation and action. That is, they can almost be interchangeable terms, depending on the passing of the age and the particular seer who is introducing them to us. But there you see at the top a quote: "The four main yogas cited in the Bhagavad-Gita guide the soul in its inward flight. Bhakti is one wing, Dhyanam the other. Karma Yoga is the body of the bird, and Buddhi Yoga is its tail feathers. The crucial flight occurs in and leads to the Atman." So this constant moving about that we're engaged in, again, outwardly with the body and inwardly with the mind's thoughts, in waking and in dream, has to have a destination. That is, it has a source, and then it has a destination, which is back to the source. And by the way, this is one reason why we're somewhat at odds as spiritual seekers and aspirants with science, Western science, as of yet, because there's only evolution being proposed there as yet. And that's only a part of the picture on the physical level alone. But there should be, according to the father of Samkhya Yoga, involution. That is, when the soul comes out, it uses various steps called tattvas to step out into the body, which is one of the grossest of all tattvas. Gross there meaning dense, and the senses and their objects. And then when it's through with the outer world and it's gotten what it can or what it wanted there, and hopefully it's satisfied its desires in the most nonviolent and dharmic way, it should then turn and be able to walk those same steps inward back to the source out of which it came. So there you see it right there. The Atman is that source. And these four yogas are ways and means in which consciousness gets into the body and then can extract itself from that without pain, suffering, or fear, or doubt, as a bodhisattva would in Buddhism, or as a jivan mukta would in our tradition of Vedanta. So with that as an opening statement, let's look, because this is a simple study, this chart, let's look at what Sri Krishna says about the four yogas as we compare them to what Swami Vivekananda said about them in yesterday's class. So in the upper left, you have Bhakti Yoga, or devotion. And out of the Gita, you read, "Becoming Brahman, serene-minded, that one neither grieves nor desires. The same to all beings, he obtains supreme devotion to me. By devotion, he knows the truth, what and who I am, and having known, forthwith enters into me." I always like to make the observation there that the word "me" is always uppercased, because you're talking about the archetypical soul, or the supreme being, or the firstborn, the Ishvara form, the Godhead. There's been called many, many different things by different organizations and different classes of devotees. So you see there, you're returning to a source in form, is how the Vedantas would put that, Ishvara. And then from Ishvara, you would be able to more easily get to the Father through the Son, as the Christians, as Jesus said. So you get the Son being Ishvara and the Father being Brahman, if you want to make those connections in the universal religion way of speaking. So Bhakti Yoga then shows itself up as this path of devotion, and it's free of all the impediments that I was beginning to talk about at the end of yesterday's class, as grief and desire, lust and anger, what they call the 6 passions, the 8 fetters, the 9 antaryayas, the 5 kleshas. If you know these Sanskrit words and you have studied some with me and with other Dharma teachers, you know that all of these obstacles or impediments are mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. They're mentioned in other great scriptures like the Gita. and in the different religious traditions of the world, people are familiar with them and trying to, as I said, either forbear or transcend them. In yoga, you would just send them back to their source, as they're a part of the dual mind. And it's a very, actually a very lucid way of thinking about it, that nothing is ever destroyed, so you can't actually destroy the passions either, but you can send them back to the source from which they came. And that would be, of course, Prakriti and the gunas, the insentient side of life. The sentient side of life is, well, guess who? It's you. And you're doing the evolution process, and you then should be able to return using the involution process. The oldest teacher in India that we can probably think of, Lord Kapila, at least the one who left behind a darshana, said that about the process. Sancharaha prati sancharaha, with 3 words in a scripture that's mostly lost, a set of scriptures, the Samkhya Yoga scriptures that are mostly lost to us now because of antiquity. He mentioned sancharaha prati sancharaha. He means there's a chain of evolutes out from the source, and then there's a chain of evolutes back into the source. So this is not one-sided physical science that we take to task and we take exception to as spiritual aspirants. This is a path which is an eternal path. Krishna calls it that in the Gita. The path of the sun, they come by the path of the sun, never, and they leave by the path of the sun, never to return to the body again. Others come by the path of the moon, and they come and they go, wanting different desires and getting their desires satisfied as far as that's possible. So they come and they go. That's the ancestor path. That is the ancestors and the humans changing place with each other from lifetime to lifetime. All they are taking place in the mind and using the outer world for the platform, like a dancer needs a stage to perform. So the devotional path, if you can awaken it in the heart and implement it into life, is a very sweet and beautiful path that is almost a natural way of involution back to the source. Looking across the chart so that we can get the whole 2 hours, into a side of 2 hours we can get to these points. The Jnana Yoga wisdom path is there. And Krishna says about that, of pure, well, he puts points in the Gita about it. First of all, the person following it would be of pure intellect, and they would abide in the self. That's the goal. They'd restrain the senses. They'd become free of attachments and aversions, by the way. Those two go hand in hand. Raga Dvesha, the father of yoga, called that. And dwell in solitude. We had that teaching yesterday on the chart with Swamiji. Eat sparsely, subdue body, mind, and speech, engage in meditation. You can see there how that path I was mentioning of Buddha Yoga, which sounds like the path of Jnana Yoga because you're using the intellect so much, come together in a synthesis that's so natural. You engage in meditation with the Jnana Yoga already in place and your ignorance gone. Then it says, they're full of dispassion. They're free of the sense of I, me, and mine. I'm to understand that Sri Ramakrishna only had a few English words when he was alive in the 1800s, and he liked those I, me, and mine, how to get rid of the ego. So that's, of course, referring to the ahamkara, or small ego, that's trying to take over life and mind and use it for, everyday purposes, you might say, or even worse, selfishness. Those beings who have attained the Jnana Yoga wisdom path are also established in peace. My personal favorite, if you will, that's always been the path I've felt most inclined towards. In India, there are 5 relationships you can have with the divine being. And you can be the son or the father or mother of the divine being. You can be the beloved of the divine being. You can be the servant of the divine being, and you can also be at peace with the divine being. So that's always appealed personally to me. I love that peaceful way of existence, and would be able to recommend it to everyone who feels deeply the sufferings here coming about due to war and violence. Also, abandoning ego, violence, arrogance, desire, enmity, and property. Kamam, krodam, darpam, and so forth. It's there in Sanskrit in the Bhagavad-Gita. It's one sentence that Sri Krishna levels at Arjuna when he's describing the demoniacal beings who come to earth, the power mongers and the warmongers. So that is a rundown list that you'll find Sri Krishna enumerating in the Bhagavad-Gita when he's speaking specifically about the wisdom yoga. Now, down the chart, I mean, there could be commentary on each one of those, and that's where you would take teachings and think about them, and yourself also look back on your notes if you've noted them down, and each one of them is a porthole towards realization. The mind can become fully ensconced in any one of those great teachings, and it can spend hours in them without even knowing the passage of time. Like we hear Buddha spent 40 or 50 days under the bo tree, and Christ spent 12 days sitting in the wilderness, and Muhammad went into the desert. And what did they do there? Did they just worry about nations and governments and people and suffering? Or were their minds steeped in God? They went away from the company of men in order so, without any inhibitions and without any barriers in the way, they could just think about the divine being and merge with it. Like a hailstone in an ocean, Shankara uses that beautiful analogy. So here under the Buddha Yoga meditation, that is the path of meditation, you see Sri Krishna's quote, mentally resigning all deeds unto me, having me as the highest goal, and resorting to Buddha Yoga, the yoga of concentration, do thou ever fix thy mind upon me alone. So here's where concentration turns to meditation, turns to Samadhi. So meditation has two doorways leading in and out of it in this way. According to the father of yoga, you would, after you had observed the yamas and niyamas, like things like nonviolence and truthfulness and so forth, and you learned how to sit in one single posture so that the mind can free itself from the body, and you breathe in and out and connect that to those three movements of your breath to the word AUM, and connect that to Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and you had this deep meditation going on because of the teachings you'd received. You would then come to this very difficult place, especially in this day and age for most people, called pratyahar. Pratyahar means you have to then, if you haven't already, withdraw your mind from sense objects. That teaching can take on a bit of a moral implication, and some people have been burned by irreligion here in the West, as Swamiji called it. And when they hear about such things that you must do that, you must do this, it sort of puts them off the path and off the effort, which is unfortunate that religion would end up doing that to people. That is irreligion. So then true religion has to come along and save the day. And these great souls come back to try and refresh our memory as to these great teachings of knowledge, which they insist are all within us already. So in that case, then you would be having a deep meditation only if you could remove your mind consciously from objects. So maybe less of an imperative or a moral directive, it might be better just to experiment with it and try not to think about things that are on your mind all the time. It's a kind of detachment, they call it, or vairagyam. And if you've been convinced that objects are transitory and there's really no reason anyway to be hanging on to them, that isn't practical. For instance, objects can be stolen. They can become boring. They can be destroyed, stop working. They can be stolen by thieves. You can go along with a whole host of reasons why you should be able to convince your mind to give up thinking about objects all the time. And how free that makes you feel afterwards when you've done that. You can always put your mind back on them later. That's no problem. In fact, my teacher used to teach, you should be able to attach and detach at will. So it's not just detachment, except for the person who is having a problem with attachment. But the art to learn really is to be able to put your mind like a yogi where it's supposed to be and then take it off, which would be the same if you're trying to help, say, a suffering being. You have to identify with their suffering and take it on. But then you can't get pulled down with them. The example I use sometimes is when we were in our surfing days here in Hawaii. As you know me, I've been known to be a surfer in my 20s, a very beautiful experience to have out on the water. And so I was a good swimmer. And the waves here in Hawaii are quite ferocious in the winter. So I lived on the beach, and people would get too close to the waves and get pulled out. So a couple times I had to jump in to these big waves and go and try and fish them out of the water, save their lives. I remember a case of two sailors who you'd think would know the ocean, but they didn't know the waves. They might have known the ocean from the deck of a ship, but they didn't know the waves and how powerful they are. So they were too close to the shore break and got pulled out. I heard their cries and came off the deck of my house there and jumped in and swam out to them. So when I swam up to them, though, they were panicking. So I said, I wouldn't let them get near me. They thought they were drowning. I said, you're not drowning. If you stop panicking and just know that you float, you'll be fine because you're outside of the wave breaking right now. They got pulled out, you see. And so then when the waves subsided a little bit, as a surfer knows about, then you get them close to them and you help them swim, convince them to swim in. The whole point of the story is not about saving lives and all that, because death is an illusion anyway. The whole point of the story is that you don't get identified with people suffering when they're in a panic and get pulled down with them. So that's one of the things which souls who are liberating other souls come to know, that they really have to make a certain effort on their own first so that you can help them. Otherwise, the two of you could go drowning in the ocean of suffering together. You'll get pulled down with them. So just a lesson from life itself that can be given or should be given a spiritual twist or connotation. So in that way then, back to objects and how to detach from them, it's a good experiment. And that's what this fifth limb of yoga is all about. And that's the doorway into concentration. So back to the chart there, please. You'll see that the quote that Sri Krishna gives there is very apropos for what was just told you. That is, you resort to the Buddha yoga path, which is a yoga of concentration, and then fix your mind in meditation upon the archetypical soul, or your ishtam, they call it, your chosen ideal, or antaryami, the divine being seated in your heart. So then concentration would be a doorway into meditation, and then meditation can be a doorway into the Almighty Father, or into Brahman, where all form disappears. So some comment about the Buddha yoga meditation there that is mentioned in the Gita. Let's look then, there must be one other yoga hiding down there at the feet of the Japanese maiden there, who's looking at the palm of her hand and the jewel there, as if you would look at your own Atman if you were, say, Ma Sharda, She used to say, I can take my Atman out of hiding anytime I want and see it anytime I want, just as you would see a fruit in the palm of your hand. So I liked this illustration. It reminded me of Ma Sharda. So there's the fourth yoga, and it's good we leave it to the last. In importance throughout the ages, it has been last. Very odd that people are using that one route most of the time, action. And then they're inactive in sleep, except for their dreams. Their dreams don't really mean much to them. And then they come back to reality. So a weird word to use for the body, that it's reality. The seers look at it exactly opposite, that inaction is reality. So here we have the two put close together, meditation right next to karma yoga. I want to take us to a chart next that shows those two side by side so we get clearer about the path of inaction and action. Because in the Gita, and I can quote it to you, those who know inaction as action and action as inaction, they truly know. That's probably one of the hardest of all slokas of the Gita to make sense out of. And you have to slow down each word and think about it as I just did when I spoke it, to make sense of it in English. So if you look at, and we will look at more, karma yoga action path there is a quote out of the Gita, because the third chapter, the early chapters really are a lot about karma yoga and how to refine it, and then finally how to renounce it, and in the proper way too. It's a shock to people when they first come and read the early chapters of the Gita that Sri Krishna is advising the path of action over inaction. It's not until later in the Gita that he begins to lead him, after his mind has understood that action is a purificatory mechanism for most people, that then they can get into a state of inaction after they have understood properly the role of action. I mentioned yesterday some of Swami Vivekananda's biting comments on karma yoga. And of course, those are karma yoga around the individual, how people are getting caught in karma coming from actions. So they're not doing their actions dharmically or honestly or practically. They're not thinking about them and letting them mount up as karmas in the back of their mind, which causes rebirth, of course, we know that. So both Sri Ramchandra and Sri Krishna are really the experts in all of the religious and spiritual world about karma. So he starts off saying in these first early chapters about how one uses action to refine oneself, and then pretty soon can go beyond action and reach the Brahman state. It's beautifully set up in the Gita, and the way Sri Krishna leads Arjuna out of depression, which is the name of the first chapter, is a marvelous thing to behold and understand. There's where you'd be contemplating on the teachings that Krishna is giving you. So there, the quote from Sri Krishna, one of them, doing continually all actions in me, taking refuge in me, by my grace, he reaches the eternal undying abode. So you see that when we looked at the Karma Yoga chart, the 4 yogas chart yesterday, and we saw the Karma Yoga box with all its dynamics, this is all put here in a condensed form. We saw that the path of selfless action, making an offering of everything to the Lord, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir, the famous chant in the Gita, then we know that that's really the mental orientation or perspective that one has to get in order to realize the truth of the undying abode. That is one's identity with Brahman. So that's been put in different ways by different rishis and different luminaries, but they all have this unique way of explaining it to us so that we can, as I was saying earlier, become participants in our own spiritual awakening. Or if we are already awake, go all the way to the goal and pick up the thread of our yoga in this lifetime, as Krishna says in the Gita, and follow it full to realization. So this path of self-surrender, Sharanagat, they call it in Sanskrit, is enjoined by both the bhakti path and the karma path. It's also noted in the Eightfold Path of the Buddha: right perspective, right orientation, right action, right livelihood. All of those, if you look at the Fourth Noble Truth of the Buddhist system, you'll find so many of the salient points that are there in the description of teachings of the Dharma in India. Buddhism being 500 years and 50 years before Jesus showed up, so a later period. As you can see how Lord Buddha took all the great teachings of Lord Kapila and others, and whereas he didn't necessarily places the accent on the Vedas, the Upanishads, because they weren't being taught very well in that day and age. He came up with the Four Noble Truths. And if you look at the Eightfold Path, which is the Fourth Noble Truth, you'll find many of the similarities between the Dharmic teachings in the Gita and Lord Buddha's own system. Well, let's finish this chart, which I already said was an easy study, and read this final overall sloka from Sri Krishna. Thus has wisdom more profound than all profundities been declared to you by me. Reflect upon it daily and then act as you choose. This secret is never to be spoken to those who are devoid of austerities, nor those who are not devoted, nor those who do not render service or speak ill of me. And those who study this great secret of the fourfold yoga, they rightly and duly perform the sacrifice of knowledge to me. And that's what wakens people up. So at the end of the 18th chapter, he mentions that it's the greatest kind of service you can do to the Lord. Is this knowledge sacrifice that helps people wake up from their ignorance and escape suffering. Again, like the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, there's a cause for it, there's a way out of it, and then there's this Eightfold Path. So all the Indian darshanas are concurring with each other, and to study them all in any given lifetime is to have a full awakening to the profundities of what we like to call mother wisdom, divine mother wisdom in the Sri Ramakrishna path. So I said that a good segue out of that chart would be to go into these two wings of the bird. There are two charts that take these four yogas and contrast them across the board with each other. Yesterday's four yoga chart that I showed you, The New Religion of the Age by Swami Vivekananda, just listed bullet points, which were dynamics of each of those paths. But these next two charts I hope to show you and complete in this two-class series will show you how they look straight across the board from one another, and that way make it a matter of easier synthesis to try and integrate these great teachings into your life. So let's take the first one, since we just finished meditation and action. Let's start on the two paths of action and inaction. How could they possibly be similar or coexist with one another? You'll see that it's very wonderful to at least think of it in that way, because we know that throughout India, and we always laud and honor the great rishis who were truly universal minded, but in any country, in any age, there are going to be people who are narrow. India, no exception. So some of the beings that got a hold of the non-dual scriptures and misinterpreted them, just like happens in every religion. That's also happened a lot with the two paths of Bhakti and Dhyanam. And with these two paths of action and inaction, these kinds of beings don't think in terms of synthesis or something that's already one. And when they put it side by side, if they were to do so, would be thinking of it in terms of superior and inferior. And I've never thought that way, and I've never seen my teachers in the Ramakrishna order or our founder, Lex Hixon, think in that way. It's always, it's not prati tantra siddhanta that these paths compete with each other. It's more sahaja tantra siddhanta, that they are always one. And you just take them apart so that you can compare them, like this chart is doing here. And Sri Ramakrishna says it very nice in that first quote. Rub your hands with coconut oil before opening the sticky jackfruit. Likewise, before entering into the world of action, develop and apply the practices of discrimination and meditation. That's neither a popular notion or something that people are going to follow. That is, you would think that one would qualify oneself before going somewhere, like maybe get a roadmap before you start driving to that city you're headed for, or learn the manual before you operate the chainsaw. That's a good one. Various things like that. You'd think that that would be sort of a matter of natural intelligence, but people just somehow they just like to jump into action and see what happens. Not always that advisable, and in philosophy and religion definitely not advisable, because the deeper truths get veiled for one thing, and then a lot of mistakes get made along the way. So we know the downside. I think those of us watching here probably know the downside of the path of action, karma yoga. So when you put forth the laws of karma yoga, I'm starting there on the right-hand side of the chart, right above the koa e ula bird. I should tell you a little story about that bird here in the cliffs of Hawaii. It never touches the ground, its feet. It flies and soars high in the sky all the time, and when it goes to have its eggs, it nests up high in the little nooks and crannies and caves of the cliff. So it never comes to earth. You never see it on the ground. It reminds me a little bit of the chatak bird that Sri Ramakrishna talks about in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where he says it will never drink any water until it's rainwater that it falls when the star Swati is in ascendancy. Then when that star is up there and it rains, it'll drink that water only. They're describing a very particular, even finicky, you might say, type of devotee who will only drink that water of Brahman when it's pure and available, and will not drink any other kind of water. So here with the koa e ula bird, and I'm not digressing, I hope, but it does bring home the story of how it never touches the ground. We always see it soaring high in the air when we espy it. It's got that red tail, so it's easy to see by that way. But it nests in the cliffs, so it's a very good metaphor for like Sri Ramakrishna. I mean, speaking of bird stories, do you remember when Sri Ramakrishna said that there's the mythical bird that soars high in the sky in Indian Itihasa, and it lays its egg in the sky, and that egg falls for a long time, and when it comes close to earth, then it hatches and soars back up to its mother. So Sri Ramakrishna used that story to describe Swami Vivekananda's when his soul got embodied. He came to earth, he was like the egg of that great mythical bird, and came to earth and just brushed its surface and then soared back to its mother in the sky. So all of these bird stories are very beautiful to contemplate. It's not just the teachings of the Dharma that you can take into your head, but you can take into your head, as Patanjali says in his 7 ways of mastering the mind. You can take images of the divine into your mind and contemplate them, have darshan with them, play with them, sport with them, have an internal companion that's with you all the time, as we were talking about in satsang today. And then you can also take these stories of the Itihasa and scriptural history of India or in any religion and think about them deeply, like the play of Sri Ramakrishna in this present time with all the 16 direct disciples. We've spent lots of time in the West now meditating upon that great soul and what he brought to us here, to the world, and particularly where we are in the Western Hemisphere, where Dharma is very rare. And its opposite, adharma, is actually on the rise all the time. So rub your hands with the coconut oil. That's this discrimination and meditation. Then enter into the world of action. We'd like to see that happen more. Then people would be qualified, and they'd be shielded from the sticky sap of Maya, it says there, the sticky jackfruit. So there on the, to connect us nicely to the last chart, there's that quote I just said. Those who see action in inaction, and inaction in action, they truly see, Sri Krishna says out of the Gita. So let's try and see how these two made up somehow. They seem so opposite and contradictory towards one another, how we can put them together. Like we should be able to put what's external and what's internal together, as Shankara tells us, into one state. So there you see the laws of karma yoga. Work free of the desire for results, work free of karmic accrual, work done meticulously, work done in evenness of mind, work done in failure or success. That's a good one to learn. Work done as worship, work done in knowledge, and work done free of attachment. So these are some of the laws of karma yoga that we have extracted out of the great teachings of Sri Ramachandra and Sri Krishna, again, who really are the best experts, I think, about karma yoga. You go to them to find out that there are 4 types of karma, there are 4 shades of karma, there are 4 dynamics to karma, that there is past, present, future, and cumulative karma, spontaneous karma, and all these teachings about karma. If you have those kinds of questions about how karma comes to people and why things don't work out for you, if you want to put it in just a very commonplace way, then you can go and study the laws of karma yoga and their dynamics with, as has been espoused by Sri Ramachandra and Sri Krishna. Those are the best teachers of karma yoga, I think. So then across the board from that, karma yoga is some of the things we need to look about in terms of the meditation yoga. Now, here's where, when you say Dhyan yoga, you'd obviously think of Raja yoga, so you'd be thinking of the 8-limbed yoga, also called Ashtanga. That's where I said earlier that there are many names for the meditation yoga. Raja yoga just means royal or kingly yoga. It's if you follow it, it's so effective and so thorough. And Dhyan yoga means the yoga of meditation, which is the 7th limb of those 8 limbs, as you see there. And Ashtanga means 8-limbed. It's also called Patanjala because Patanjali, the founder or the father of yoga at that time, in that incarnation of his, about 140 AD, they say, composed or construed this 8-limbed yoga and gave it out to the people at that time, and it's followed suit since then with many great commentators appreciating it, like Vedavyas, the father of Vedanta, very much loved the Raja Yoga system of Patanjali. So there you have the father of Vedanta in accord and in admiration of the father of yoga system. So those different names for that, we also saw that it could even be called Buddhi yoga in Sri Krishna's way of thinking, and how closely aligned that is with the wisdom path. I could have taken you on deeper levels of this, but like the first 2 limbs are yamas and niyamas, and I have separate charts, of course, on those 10 that go deeply into them. Just know that things like nonviolence have been with India forever, and probably Jainism is one of its best example of the usage of nonviolence for so long. I mean, Jainism has the 24 Tirthankaras, I think, and Mahavir was the 24th, I believe. And so Mahavir lived before the time Lord Buddha, I think. So if you go back 24 generations before Lord Buddha, then you'll see how ancient the nonviolence of the Jains are. That's a long time to practice nonviolence as the main facet of your religion. So I think it's a great thing to hold up in front of the Western nations with war and violence towards mankind and violence towards animals too. It's a very good thing to show to people that there's an exact opposite way of conducting yourself in the art of nonviolence, and how preferable and sweet and karma-free that is. Anyway, that's why I'm saying I don't want to get into a description of all 5 yamas or all 5 niyamas here. You can look for classes online that I have taken those up and discussed them. But those first 2 limbs are observances and practices. And if there is any emphasis on morals and ethics in Indian Dharma, like there is in Christianity and Judaism with the 10 Commandments and so forth, then you'd probably find them right here. But I'd say there's a difference between morals and ethics of the Semitic religions and the yamas and the niyamas of yoga. Because nonviolence, for instance, is not thou shalt not kill. Of course, that's what would be your acts around it would follow that rule. But the real implication of nonviolence is thou cannot kill, not thou shalt not kill. It's not possible to kill anything because it was never born. That is, it's not possible to destroy anything because it was never created. So if you're thinking in terms of creation, then you've gone a different direction than the way the Indian rishis have thought from time out of mind. They're thinking in terms of the eternal, the eternal, the eternal. And you're thinking in terms of the non-eternal, the non-eternal. So that's going to put you at odds with the great truth knowers of Brahman in India. You're going to have to know that there's no creation. There's just projection from the great mind and withdrawal by the great mind back into itself. So projection and withdrawal is happening all the time, like with you and your ancestors, but no one's ever dying or getting born. How can you create a soul? A soul is. A soul is Brahman. It is consciousness. You can't create or project a soul. You can play with its consciousness and project and dissolve that. And that's called sportive play. So there again, just the yama of niyama has not just moral implications, but it has a very real connection to eternal life that Jesus talked about. I know Jesus, I believe he understood that thoroughly. He was a sannyasin. He was a free wandering soul, and he had knowledge of all the truths of divinity in him. And they say he probably did go to India in those years, those 12 years where they lost track of him, even historically, and got a refresher course, you might say, on the word and on the birthless, deathless nature of the soul. Be thee perfect. My Father are one. All those sayings were the way he brought it back into a fallen Judaism of the time and started breathing back new life into the devotees. So in the first 2 limbs of yoga on that chart, yamas and niyamas, then you see that we could go deep into them, but what we want to do is putting them straight across the board from karma yoga. We can see how the dynamics of them both work. So you see their correct posture is coming next, asana. And I think that starts in the mind, where you assume the posture of I and my Father are one, like I just said, or be thee perfect as thy Father in heaven is perfect. That's a mental asana that you want to adapt. That's qualifying yourself before you enter into the world of imperfections all around you. So, for instance, you wouldn't want to take on the mental asana, I am a sinner. That's an alien thought to the soul. I and my Father are one, and I must be perfect like my Father in heaven is perfect. So correct posture there is not just of the body. In fact, that comes later. If you teach the mind the correct posture, it will get into natural physical asanas as if they were tantric. The tantric hatha yoga has much superiority over the hatha yoga system. And you could see beings actually taking on asanas naturally without having to learn them or something, or bother the body much at all. So mental asana has to be something that we understand as a precursor or the predecessor to natural posture. Pranayama, correct breathing. And of course, I'm quoting Shankara in a lot of this, because he said that otherwise, if you don't have that mental posture in hand, your postures are just like a dried up old tree with a lot of branches. And your correct breathing is just sort of like a bellows. A bellows goes in and out, blowing air in and out, but it never gets enlightened. So to do pranayama in a conscious way would be to connect it to the word. And if you have to awaken it in this lifetime, then that's what you do in order to enter into the karma yoga field across from it. So you put these side by side and you begin to see how meditation informs action, and how action proves meditation. That is, it proves the truth of meditation. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Probably a moot question right now, because you want to see all of these in the sahaja, the natural way, as being one at all times. You only take them apart to examine them so it clarifies your mind. Like that bird in the middle there, you see one wing is called Bhakti Yoga. Its other wing is called Jnana Yoga. Its tail feathers called Raja Yoga, and its body is called Karma Yoga. So the body is, of course, the field of action, and it needs to have the two wings of Bhakti and Dhyanam equally balancing it. And it guides itself by meditation. The bird guides its direction by its tail feathers. So that's a beautiful analogy to put the four yogas together. And easy to think about it is just the bird that soars freely in the sky of awareness towards the ultimate goal. And Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa had many bird stories that were teachings to that effect. If you keep looking down the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga, you'll see that word that I mentioned last time, pratyahara. That's listed there as sense control. More specifically, taking the senses off their objects, willingly and naturally. That is, if you're attached to them, that's going to be a bit of a problem for you. But if you're not that attached to things, it shouldn't be much of a difficulty at all. And Patanjali says that you'll begin to have samadhi with objects when you can take your mind off of them. Isn't that an interesting statement? That you're not really enjoying the objects when you're pawing them and tasting them and owning them and so forth. But you really get the bliss out of objects when you put them distant from you and don't have attachment. In other words, attachment spoils the senses, the meeting of the senses with the objects. Swami Vivekananda called that exquisite pleasure. Most people are just getting mere pleasure from their life, but the yogi gets exquisite pleasure from everything in life. And that's a monk talking there, so you probably should sit up and listen to that. So if you were to take your mind off of the outer objects, then you'll find out where they originated. That's the whole key to the thing, is that all objects came out of your mind. God didn't create them because there's no creation, and God isn't a creator. It's beyond creation and destruction. So what did create the worlds? The mind. The great mind, the collective mind, and the individual mind, in cahoots with one another, created the worlds of name and form and time and space. And they also dissolve them, like every night in deep sleep, individually. So then one starts to know the mind-only schools, quote unquote, which all of India's philosophies agree upon. It's the mind-only schools you're studying when you go to India, that everything comes from the mind. Everything that seems to come and go in cycles is not Brahman at all. It's cycles in the mind, thought cycles, and objects are thoughts that you solidified out here. You formed them and you found the seeds for them in deep sleep. Then you formed them in dream, and then you solidified them in waking. And then you did the opposite when you went back into deep sleep tonight and got rid of them. So this is why, for instance, if you believed in evolution, then you wouldn't have very long to look back into your previous lifetimes, would you? Because you weren't a human very long in that case, looking back on monkeys and evolution and back to the paramecium and all that kind of thing, as if the soul could ever be any of those things. You were never a monkey, you were always the Atman. However, that's taking us in a little different track. You want to see your incarnations, of which they say there are thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands. You'd go far beyond the pale of linear time in order to look back on that. It wouldn't make sense. You have to look back inside yourself into these cycles that the collective mind is projecting bodies and ancestors and angels and gods and goddesses and rishis and Trinity. They say one day of Lord Brahma's life is 4 billion years long, and one night's another 4 billion. So you're talking about everything back inside of yourself, isn't it? And now you understand how everything's eternal and how nothing's ever born and nothing ever dies, that everything's on a cycle. And perhaps you might want to get off that cycle, and that's called moksha or mukti. And there have been thousands of souls who have made that jump and succeeded in it. So this is all in accord with this path of meditation and action. And Sri Krishna sets it up so nicely in the Gita, and Swami Vivekananda then brings it back full force in this age. And he calls it, well, here, let's recall this new religion of the age. It's not actually new at all. It's what the original soul taught at the beginning. It's the path of the sun and the path of the moon. So here you have a reincarnation of a great soul telling you in this day and age, bring back the 4 yogas. Maybe you don't need to be worrying about all these other minor yogas or this and that yoga. But make sure you know about this eternal truth, which Sri Krishna says is the secret of it all. The 4 yogas, those who teach the secret to beings, they do the highest service of Jnana Yoga sacrifice. So back on our chart there, if you please, we want to finish up something on the left-hand side of it, because we were talking so much about pratyahar, and that's it's a falling off step for Westerners I've seen in my 30 or 40 or more years of sharing the Dharma with people. Is that when they try and climb the 8 limbs of yoga, some of them get about as far as number 5 and fall off the tree. So real concentration, real meditation, and real samadhi, very rare, according to my teachers and also in my experience. You can have an off and on kind of concentration. That's called vikshepa mind by the father of yoga, that sometimes you're balanced, sometimes you're not. People are suffering that a lot. That's the 3rd state of mind. But the 4th state of mind is ekagra, where you get even. Sounds familiar because we just went through that in Sri Krishna's version of even-mindedness of the Jnana Yoga path. You get even-mindedness from that. So you're not thrown off by everything that Maya throws at you in your life. So dharana, meditation, and samadhi, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, those are called samyama. That's a triputi that's very powerful. If a yogi gets samadhi in that sequential way that's traditional, then he can use concentration, meditation, samadhi on anything. There's really no good English word for samadhi, so we're using here non-dual abidance. But if you put those three together, then the yogi can see into the future, can see into the past, and can see into the present, and can help beings. Of course, we're not talking about occult powers here. We're talking about yogic abilities. So you have to know the distinction between those two. A lot of people would use that power, if they could even get it, to make money and to dominate over other people and so forth. We know that run of things, that ilk. But the yogi is very much into awakening all souls from their illusion of finitude. Nice line that was coined by our founder, Lex Sixon. Awaken all souls from the illusion of finitude. That means they think they're a finite being, and that's not true. They're an infinite soul. So then one would go about doing that by mastering the limbs of yoga and then turning it back on itself and helping the world. How would you do that? Through karma yoga. See? So all of these things, and according to Vivekananda, can be played back into karma yoga, which he says right now in this day and age in the Kali Yuga is the most important yoga of all as far as service is concerned. You master the other limbs and then bring all of that to people who are living the illusion of finitude, that is, who think that action is the only thing in life. And so that's where people have been doing action all their lives in other countries and nations, in every loka, lower realm of the seven worlds. And work has been going on and on and on, playing back into itself. Every once in a while, some great soul comes and says, let's try and put the other three yogas into this process and see what happens to our work. Let's go on and finish this chart by looking at the bottom, because we've seen how meditation, or how inaction is inaction and how action is inaction. I hope that that sloka of the Gita is now more clear to us, that we've put it this way. Now here's where I said, very interesting, that you could put points of the two across from each other. Now karma yoga is on the left-hand side in this case, and Raja Yoga, or the meditation yoga, is on the right-hand side. So let's just look straight across quickly. Study and practice of the lower four limbs of yoga is conducive to karma yoga. That is, you'd be truthful, non-violence, you wouldn't covet the goods of others, and you'd be moderate in all appetites, and purify yourself, study the scriptures, memorize the slokas, increase your devotion to God. All the yamas and niyamas are there. Those are the four, along with asana and pranayama, are the four lower limbs. And so that's how karma yoga would benefit. But look across the board with your Raja Yoga, it's study and practice of the upper four limbs. So there is where you get to taking your mind off the sense objects, gaining concentration because you did that. That is, when you try and concentrate, you're not distracted by things around you anymore. So it's a natural thing. Then you can meditate when you're naturally concentrated, and then you can have samadhi. Beautiful, isn't it? Put these side by side. Now, the next point, striving towards achieving mental oneness in action, is karma yoga. Striving towards dissolving the mind's vibrations is Jnana yoga, or Raja yoga. Therefore, so you try and be one in action. That is, you try and keep yourself steady and not get thrown off by every little thing that happens to you in life. Like people reading the newspaper or watching TV or seeing some of the latest headlines about the latest virus that's come to Earth, as if many haven't already come and many more will come in the future. They get all put off by it, and then they fall out of yoga. You never should fall out of yoga. That's yoga is life, and it's balance and it's peace. And Holy Mother, Ma Sharada, my Guru's Guru, said to us that you should never lose your peace of mind for any reason. You need peace of mind first and foremost. Anything you do that isn't done with peace of mind will result in karma. So you shouldn't engage in any act or any thought or any reading unless you have peace of mind, and that is yoga at the foundation of it all. So I like those 2 points put across from each other. In Karma Yoga, you're thinking of how to keep your balance. And in Raja Yoga, you're trying to dissolve everything that throws you out of balance. And therefore makes you try and climb back into balance. So that's how the yoga of meditation acts, and in what periphery it acts, at what level. The next 2 points side by side there, you see, are performing action as duty and worship, free of all motivations and expectations. That's how one of the Karma Yoga laws, or several of them put together. But in Raja Yoga, you'll perform all action in a meditative state so as to avoid karmic accrual. And that's where you're using the mind to do everything for you. This is my point about hatha and healing and psychotherapy and so forth in the West today. You notice that if people knew the power of their own minds, they'd be sitting in one place and directing their life from the mind. There's a song in India that says, "Oh mind, you are the supreme monarch in the world of the senses and the objects. Everything is connected to you. Yet you've become a petty potentate," the song says, by not knowing your true nature and by taking advice from counselors like the 5 senses and their sense objects. So the mind is the sovereign in the land of awareness. It's the king of everything. We just said it projects all the worlds of name and form and time and space from the cosmic mind of the Trinity down through the collective mind and to the ancestors and the humans, with the animals and plants and insects standing under them. The mind has been producing all that from the get-go. When the word vibrated and made it so. So you should hear that vibration inside of your peaceful mind and direct your life that way. That's what meditating before you go to work is all about, if you want to put this in very simple terms. I encourage my students to have an hour of meditation in the morning, right out of sleep, because they're looking back into their dreams in deep sleep. They're also looking forward to their day in action. So you have a double doorway opportunity there to even everything out. Remember yesterday in the class I said that the difference between a person who's confused and a person who's balanced is that the person who's confused is projecting sankalpa, vikalpa with their mind all the time, and then chasing after their projections to try and secure them. But the person who's at peace all the time is having those projections in the morning and then dissolving those projections at night. So they're doing everything with the mind. And that's Mano Yoga. It's actually called Mano Buddhi Yoga. I won't get to that chart. I don't think there's time today to get to that chart, but I had it up for viewing. Mano Buddhi Yoga and Jnanodaya Yoga are 2 great yogas that Ma Sharada came up with in her natural process of living in the body recently with us. Let's finish up the 2 more that are here. On the Karma Yoga side, recitation of the mantra to calm and master the restless mind. But in Raja Yoga, you recite the mantra to merge the mind into a non-dual state. So there again, a little bit of what I was just explaining is that the mantra helps you keep balance and helps you deal with life. It's probably not its best use, but it is one of the things that happens. You can use the mantra also to contact your Ishtam, because if you say the name of your Ishtam, then the Ishtam should come running to you, is the idea. It's like if somebody's not looking at you in the room and you say their name, they look at you. So if you say the Lord's name with devotion, then the Lord should come running to you and give you all sorts of support and peace. So that's how the mantra works. But in Raja Yoga, when you're involved in those upper four limbs, the mantra then becomes a way of merging the mind into a non-dual state. So that opens a doorway into Advaita, or non-dualism, through the pure mind. Let's look at the last entry here. Karma Yoga is devotion to the path of action for the purpose of serving God and mankind. Raja Yoga is devotion to the path of meditation to bring enlightenment to mankind. So serving, and it's like the difference between being and becoming. I just gave a talk a few days ago about convincing the mind that it is pure being and getting rid of the habit of thinking in terms of becoming all the time. I'm going to get this, or I'm going to become that, or I will get that in the future. Sort of a post-mortem way of proceeding with everything. I'll get it later or afterwards, or I'm looking for it, but it's actually yours already. So you change up the mind's perspective, again, with the mind, to know that it contains everything. Kingdoms of heaven are within you. You've got everything you want. Now you've projected them outwards and you're brooding about them and suffering with them. What's that all about? Everything should, if it comes out of you as a projection, should be seen as a projection and also dissolved at the end of every cycle, like a day or a night. And then leaving you peaceful and pure in your Atman. Speaking about the Atman, Vivekananda said this at the end of the chart. If you have known the Atman as the one existence and that nothing exists, nothing else exists, for whom, for what desire do you trouble yourself? Through Maya, all this doubt, all this doing good, etc., came to my brain. Now they are leaving me. I get more and more convinced that there is no other object in work except the purification of the soul to make it fit for knowledge. This world with its good and evil will go on in various forms. Only the evil and good will take new names and new seats. My soul is hankering after peace and rest eternal, undisturbed. He wrote that in one of his letters to one of his devotees in the West. So you can see then sort of a good exclamation point on this review of these tail feathers in the body of the bird. In the time remaining, let's look at the two wings of the bird, because we have still some 25 minutes, I believe, in order to flesh out and finish this two-class series of the four yogas. One look at it being from the standpoint of Sri Krishna's four yogas in the Gita, and those self-same four yogas being from the standpoint of Swami Vivekananda as the new religion of the sage. Now there you see the same bird again, the Koa Eula. Now you have met that bird and made it a part of your thinking process as a good metaphor for the four yogas. Now, my teacher, Swami Sheshananda, peace and bliss be upon him, said this once when I was at his ashram. Jnana and Bhakti, that is wisdom and devotion, are like the two wings of a bird. A bird cannot fly without two wings. Therefore, O Divine Mother, grant us pure love, pure knowledge, and pure devotion. So he means, of course, love and devotion being the same thing there. Give us that bhakti path, and also give us that path of pure knowledge, which strikes away our ignorance and allows us to use love in the most complete and fulfilling way, to fulfill ourselves and to fulfill others. So now what we want to do, and it's not as involved as the last chart, we'll probably have just about enough time to look at these two yogas side by side. Jnana Yoga on the left, Bhakti Yoga on the right. We'll see how they compare across the board. So hang in there for another 20 minutes as we fill out this teaching, this two-class discourse on the four yogas, a very important principle of Dharma that we need to keep in mind all the time. There, on the left side, you see study of Shruti, which means the non-dual scriptures or Advaita. When you say Shruti, it means to hear, yes. And the musicians might use a Shruti box if they don't have a tambura around. But a deeper meaning of the word Shruti, of course, is that what must be heard. You must hear that in every lifetime. The earlier, the better. So in that case, you want to hear the Upanishads. You want to hear the Bhagavad-Gita, and you want to hear the Brahma Sutras, and you want to hear Ashtavaka Samhita, Navadutta Gita, and Ramayana, and so forth. That is Adhyatma Ramayana, the non-dual version. So these are all things that are a point about Jnana Yoga. If you're doing Bhakti Yoga, then you like study of the Smriti and the Itihasa, the secondary scriptures, like the Puranas and so forth, and the stories of saints and seers and great souls, and how they added to your store of devotion as it increases. You must increase your devotion. You must also use your Dhyanam to strike ignorance out of the quotient. And I was just reminded here that we want to have a few questions at the end, so I should probably get to those in about 5 minutes. Maybe enough time to see the rest of these points. On the left, contemplation on the unity of Jivatman and Paramatman is a part of Jnana Yoga. That is, the appearance or the seeming appearance of the Jivatman as contrasted to the reality of Brahman or Paramatman needs to be collated. That is, this self is Brahman, or any of those great Mahavakyas, then that's what you'd be contemplating if you were studying the higher aspects of Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, across the board, you would contemplate the Naralila, the sport of consciousness, which I mentioned earlier. Christianity has the sport of Jesus, and it even spills out over people's lawns at Christmas time, mangers and wise men and so forth, and beautiful images done recently of the life of Buddha and all the different instances that he went around and spread the teachings of the Dharma in this new way he had. That's the Buddha Lila. And we have now Ramakrishna Lila in our Ramakrishna order of bringing the 16 direct disciples with him, and Ma Sharada, and how Vivekananda jumped the ocean like Hanuman did back in early times. All of this is a kind of Naralila that you would be entertaining in your head to fill out the bhakti side of things. So we're not saying one's better than the other. We're saying that they can't do without each other. Not for the person who wants to reach full enlightenment. I'm trying to think of Swami Vivekananda's saying. He said something to the effect that Bhakti Yoga without Jnana Yoga becomes too emotional. Jnana Yoga without Bhakti Yoga becomes too dry and intellectual. You need the combination of both. So this is why Swami Sheshananda taught about the wings of the two birds, which I, 20 years later, put together this chart that you're seeing, inspired by those words. The next entrance is meditation on Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, that is, the impersonal reality, is what Jnana Yoga focuses on. Bhakti Yoga meditate on Ishvara, the personal God, Saguna Brahman. So God exists with form and without form both. That is, Nirguna Brahman is without form, Saguna Brahman is with form, with qualities and without qualities. That is the full weight of the breadfruit, you see. You can cut out just the meat and weigh it, but if you want the full weight, Sri Ramakrishna said, then you weigh both God with form and God beyond form to know what existence is. I think we are going to be able to complete this. On the left-hand side, and the next entree is performing action as detached witness, knowing the world to be unreal. Jnana Yoga, discrimination, is known for that perspective. In Bhakti Yoga, performing all action as sacrifice, as an offering to the Lord. We looked at that both yesterday and today earlier, when we were talking about Sharnagata, how to sacrifice all your work and as a sacrifice unto the Lord. In the Bhagavad-Gita, that's called Bahuvidya Jnana, Yagya. That is many, many, many different ways of offering things to the Lord, like your food or the music you hear, the sights you see, the breath that you practice, your breathing exercise. If you're just breathing, but if you're offering that every breath to the Lord, that's very powerful. Next and penultimate is recitation of the mantra in line with meaning, insight, and willpower. That's how mantra and Jnana Yoga go together. How does Bhakti Yoga treat the mantra? Recitation of the mantra in line with love, empathy, and self-surrender. So you see how those two put together would be a winning combination to attract the Lord into the heart and mind of the devotee. And finally, we have this other across-the-board comparison. In Jnana Yoga, devotion to the path of discrimination to gain pure love. In Bhakti Yoga, devotion to the path of love to gain pure discrimination. And that's probably the best way to put it, that one seeks the highest good of the other, just like the perfect relationship. Now, the final quote down there below each of them, below Jnana Yoga, Sri Krishna says, "To those who know me in full, I reveal myself. I am dear to them, they are dear to me." So that's a nice one to put below the wisdom path, discrimination. To put below the bhakti path, he says, "To those who love me, I give them the discrimination by which they come to me." So you can see how Sri Krishna plays both off against the other as if they were just one thing. And they're not in competition. They're actually helping one another in the devotee's life to reach the highest goal. So there, to end this class and to take a few questions, the final quote. Swami Vivekananda says, "In this new religion of this age, the synthesis of yoga, knowledge, devotion, and work, the propagation of the knowledge and devotion down to the very lowest, without distinction of age or sex. Thus I want to give truth dry, hard reason, softened in the sweetest syrup of love, made spicy with intense work, and cooked in the kitchen of yoga, so that even a baby can easily digest it. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all." So now I would like to pass this back to our moderator and host. And see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Babaji. It was yet another very enlightening, very insightful session. I think we have one question. Viewers, if you have any more question, now is the time to type it either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. So please do it now. The question we have, Babaji, is how the proper practice of yoga and meditation transform our life to new heights of spiritual attainment?
I can almost use that question as an answer to that question. Yes, the proper practice of yoga and meditation do transform our life to new heights of spiritual attainment. And these charts you just saw, if you can look back at them, prove that to you. If you study them in the mind and contemplate them, roll them over and over in your mind. It's called manana or yukti, and find out how these connections work. So yoga, if you put yoga together with meditation, then from the standpoint we're talking about today, that means the Eightfold Path of Patanjali is probably the best way in which people think about a definitive path to meditation leading to samadhi. If you're talking about yoga as being any of the other 3 yogas or many of the other yogas available to us, then that's of course causing your meditations and your study of scriptures and your devotions at the altar and bringing them into life and making life much fuller and much sweeter. So I think that's a short answer of a straightforward kind in this time we have left.
Babaji, we have another question. They are asking, what are the good reading material for the new entrant on this yoga path? So can you suggest some books, some beginner material that they can read about the Patanjali Yoga?
Very simple. Oh, well, Patanjali Yoga itself, many of the commentators are actually about 40 great Indian commentators, and many of those haven't been put into English yet. But there are some readily available versions. In fact, I'm about ready to put one out myself, which is almost ready, called Atmic Testament on Yoga. And I hope to have that book out in 2 volumes in the next few months. As far as the 4 yogas themselves, great introduction. If you just get any of the 4 yoga books by Swami Vivekananda, they're called by the name of the yogas. Jnana Yoga is one of them, Bhakti Yoga is another, Karma Yoga is a third, and Raja Yoga, which is the yoga of Patanjali, is the 4th. I'd say the 4th, you probably need a teacher for that. But you can read the Jnana Yoga lectures of Vivekananda, and as I said yesterday, your bells will go off in your head. They did for me when I first read it in my 20s. And I was just taken up and very surprised by the immediate power of and profundity of the teachings of India, the way Swamiji put them. But if you're more at a beginning level, and I can end the question here, Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are excellent books to take up. They're short and straight to the point and very helpful for the beginning aspirant who wants to know about the 4 yogas.
Babaji, I have one question. In the 8 angas, 8 limbs of the Patanjali Yoga, often the asana, pranayama, and the dhyana is stressed in as a practice. But however, before that, in the first and 2 limbs, yama niyama is mentioned in the text. Do you think without a kind of steadiness in the practice of yama and niyama, a person can make, can any person really make any progress in meditation and higher aspects of yoga if he is not already steadfast in yama and niyama practice?
That's a very good question. And again, as yesterday, I have to sort of put it in terms of East and West. If we're talking about it in terms of the West today, the yamas and yamas are overlooked, and you jump straight to asana and breathing exercise. And I think in India, people have been learning about and studying and living in the yamas and niyamas, like nonviolence and non-covetousness and study of scriptures. They've been doing that for millennia. So they're very grounded in it. Even the Hindu people of today, though, as Vivekananda mentioned about them, many of them have forgotten the depths of the Upanishads and what non-duality really is, and they're trying to bring that back. But in many of the cases, I think that people then need to have been living in the yamas and niyamas naturally all the time. They don't really have to learn them. So as more pertinent to your question, I'd say that anyone can benefit by staying at the levels of yamas and niyamas. They're just, like I used to say, I was a musician, and before I could play music, I learned scales. You know what scales are, right? And so you play scales and you practice them a lot so that you know your keyboard or your fingerboard or your flute or whatever it is you're playing. So once you learn the scales and you can play music, and the scales disappear. So once you start practicing yoga, the yamas and niyamas become sort of like scales to a musician. They just disappear into the fabric of the practice of yoga, and they're natural to it. But again, I have to say, in the West, they pretty much jump them. Like, where's ahimsa? Even people who are professing to be nonviolent here have violent thoughts because of the society they're living in. So it's actually a good topic for further discussion, but yamas and yamas would be very much enjoined on Western people to practice them more deeply.
Babaji, we have one last question. They are asking if Dhyana has to be considered as is it a formless meditation, or is it a meditation with form? Or if it is a meditation with form, what shape does the mind take at this stage of practice?
Yes, it takes the shape of your thoughts. So it's with form, but it's with subtle form. And you take the mind away from the objects and you do the discriminating in your mind. And therefore, you're working with subtle objects mostly, whereas on the outside, of course, you'd be working with karma yoga and that whole bunch of teachings we just saw on the chart. So Jnana Yoga still works in the realm of form, but it works in the realm of subtle form, that is the thoughts of your mind. You're refining the antakarana, or the mental, physical, the psycho being. You're refining that aspect of it.
Thank you, Babaji. Thank you again for coming on our show for 2 days, giving this wonderful, very fascinating, very capsule a glimpse into Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, of course. And with this, we come to a conclusion of this Weekend with Wisdom. Viewers, we will be announcing the future events, the other weekend events soon. Follow us on Twitter. We have a YouTube channel. Follow us, subscribe our YouTube channel as well. You can type in Advaita Academy. And all our videos are available on our website as well. And we are also present on Facebook. To do like our Facebook page. Thank you again, Swamiji, for coming on our show. Shri Guru Pyo Namaha.